Welcome to War Bios, the podcast that delves into the intricacies of history's most pivotal conflicts. I'm your host, General Biography, and today we're going to explore one of the most devastating battles of the American Civil War, the Battle of Fredericksburg. This brutal clash between the Union and Confederate armies would leave an indelible mark on the war's trajectory and forever alter the landscape of Virginia. As we set the stage for this pivotal battle, let's journey back to the autumn of 1862. The Confederacy, still reeling from the defeat at Antietam in September, was struggling to maintain its grip on the war-torn nation. The Union Army, led by General Ambrose Burnside, had been tasked with defeating the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, commanded by the cunning General Robert E. Lee. The stage was set for a confrontation that would prove to be one of the bloodiest battles of the American Civil War. The earliest history of the Battle of Fredericksburg is marked by a series of crucial decisions made by both Lee and Burnside. In the months leading up to the battle, Lee had been carefully positioning his troops to maximize their defensive potential. He had spent considerable time studying the terrain around Fredericksburg, a small town located on the Rappahannock River in central Virginia. The town's strategic location, nestled between the river and the surrounding hills, made it an ideal place for a defensive stand. On November 9, 1862, General Burnside was appointed to command the Union Army of the Potomac, replacing General George McClellan. Burnside was determined to strike a decisive blow against the Confederacy and began making plans to cross the Rappahannock River and attack the Confederate Army. Meanwhile, Lee was busy strengthening his defenses, constructing earthworks, trenches, and abatis to hinder the Union advance. As the days passed, both armies engaged in a series of calculated maneuvers. On November 17, 1862, Union engineers began to construct pontoon bridges across the Rappahannock River in preparation for the impending assault on Fredericksburg. The Confederate forces, however, were not idle, and they worked tirelessly to strengthen their defenses. Lee carefully positioned his troops, deploying them along the high ground behind the town, where they could command a clear view of the surrounding terrain. The town of Fredericksburg itself was a small, picturesque community, with narrow streets and quaint buildings. The residents had largely fled the area, anticipating the impending battle. As the armies faced off across the Rappahannock River, the stage was set for one of the most brutal battles of the American Civil War. As we delve deeper into the origins of the Battle of Fredericksburg, it becomes clear that the events leading up to this conflict were complex and multifaceted. The battle was not simply a clash of armies, but rather the culmination of months of strategic planning, maneuvering, and preparation. The deployment of troops, the construction of defensive works, and the planning of strategic maneuvers all played a critical role in determining the course of the battle. The key figures involved in the development of the Battle of Fredericksburg were General Robert E. Lee, General Ambrose Burnside, and their respective staffs. These men, along with thousands of soldiers on both sides, would soon find themselves embroiled in one of the most devastating battles of the American Civil War. The armies are in place, the terrain has been transformed into a battlefield, and the commanders have made their plans. On December 11, 1862, Union engineers began to construct pontoon bridges across the Rappahannock River under the watchful eyes of Confederate sharpshooters. The Union Army's plan was to cross the river, assemble on the outskirts of Fredericksburg, and then launch a massive assault on the Confederate defenses. However, the Confederates were well prepared, having spent weeks constructing earthworks, trenches, and abatis to hinder the Union advance. As the Union troops began to cross the river, they came under intense fire from Confederate sharpshooters and artillery. The Union engineers worked tirelessly to complete the pontoon bridges, despite being targeted by Confederate guns. Once the bridges were in place, the Union infantry began to pour across the river, forming up on the outskirts of Fredericksburg. The town itself was a scene of chaos and destruction. Buildings were set ablaze, either by accident or design, and the streets were filled with the sounds of gunfire, screams, and panicked horses. The Union troops, once assembled, launched a series of frontal assaults against the Confederate defenses, but they were repeatedly repelled with devastating losses. One of the most infamous episodes of the battle took place on the slopes of Marye's Heights, where the Union Army's Irish Brigade launched a courageous but doomed assault against the Confederate lines. The brigade, composed of Irish-American soldiers, charged up the hill in the face of withering fire, suffering horrific casualties. The bravery and sacrifice of these soldiers would become legendary, but it would not be enough to break the Confederate defenses. As the battle raged on, the Union Army's commander, General Ambrose Burnside, became increasingly frustrated by the lack of progress. Despite repeated pleas from his subordinates to change tactics, Burnside insisted on continuing the frontal assaults, which only resulted in more bloodshed and carnage. The Confederates, meanwhile, held firm, their defenses proving impenetrable to the Union Army's attacks. The Battle of Fredericksburg was a disaster for the Union Army, with over 12,000 casualties, including killed, wounded, or missing soldiers. The Confederate Army, on the other hand, suffered relatively light losses with around 5,000 casualties. As the battle drew to a close, the Union Army retreated back across the Rappahannock River, leaving behind a trail of death and destruction. As we reflect on the Battle of Fredericksburg, it's clear that this conflict marked a turning point in the American Civil War. The Union Army's defeat would lead to a re-evaluation of its strategy and tactics, while the Confederate Army's victory would bolster their confidence and morale. The battle also highlighted the bravery and sacrifice of soldiers on both sides, who fought with honor and distinction in the face of overwhelming odds. The Battle of Fredericksburg was a pivotal moment in American history, one that would have far-reaching consequences for the war and the nation. In the immediate wake of the battle, the town of Fredericksburg lay in ruins. Buildings were reduced to rubble, streets were littered with the dead and wounded, and the once thriving community was left to pick up the pieces. The Confederate Army, victorious but exhausted, set about tending to their own wounded and burying their dead. As news of the Union defeat spread, it sent shockwaves throughout the North. The public, already weary of the war, began to question the leadership of President Abraham Lincoln and the competence of General Ambrose Burnside. The defeat at Fredericksburg marked a low point in Union morale, with many wondering if the war could ever be won. In the months that followed, the Union Army underwent a significant transformation. General Joseph Hooker replaced Burnside as commander of the Army of the Potomac, and a new strategy was implemented to address the shortcomings that had led to the defeat at Fredericksburg. The Army began to focus on training, discipline, and maneuver warfare rather than relying solely on frontal assaults. The Battle of Fredericksburg also had significant implications for the Confederate Army. The victory bolstered their confidence and morale, and it marked a turning point in the career of General Robert E. Lee. Lee's success at Fredericksburg cemented his position as one of the most prominent generals of the war, and he would go on to lead the Confederate Army to several more victories. In the years that followed, the Battle of Fredericksburg became a symbol of the brutality and futility of war. The courage and sacrifice of soldiers on both sides were remembered and honored, but the battle also served as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict. As one historian noted, the Battle of Fredericksburg was a grim harbinger of the horrors that would unfold in the years to come, a testament to the enduring power of war to shape and scar human experience. Today, the site of the Battle of Fredericksburg is remembered as a sacred place where thousands of soldiers gave their last full measure of devotion. The Fredericksburg National Cemetery, established in 1865, serves as a final resting place for over 15,000 Union soldiers, while the nearby Confederate Cemetery honors the memory of nearly 1,000 Confederate dead. The bravery and sacrifice of soldiers on both sides, the devastating consequences of war, and the enduring legacy of the battle all serve as reminders of the importance of remembering and honoring our collective past. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And, until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.